My name is Celeste Marrow. I am now 39 years old. But before I became that version of myself, I was Celeste Hargrove, the only daughter in a house that looked perfect from the outside and felt tightly controlled on the inside. My father, Ronald Hargrove, and my mother, Patricia Hargrove. I was 16 the night my parents threw me out. The rain started slowly, almost apologetically, like the sky itself was reluctant to be part of what was happening. I stood on the front steps of the house I had grown up in, holding my small bag with both hands, shaking so hard I could hear my own teeth. My mother stood behind my father in the doorway, her eyes fixed somewhere above my head, as though looking directly at me might cost her something she wasn't prepared to spend. My father's face had gone somewhere cold and sealed and final, like a room whose door has been closed and bolted from the inside. He was not the man who used to carry me on his shoulders at the market when I was small. He said I had shamed the family. He said I had made my choice. He said I would have to live with it. I said I was still their daughter. I kept saying the word daughter, as though repetition might remind them of something they had temporarily forgotten. I told them I was scared. I used every true thing I had because I thought the truth was enough. But they had already decided, long before I stood there in the rain. The decision was waiting for the moment to land. The door closed before I finished my sentence. Then I heard the lock. Welcome to Revenge Tomorrow, where stories don't just entertain, they hit back. Get comfortable because today's story will take you on a journey you won't forget. Before we begin, drop, comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hit that like button. Subscribe and join the family because trust me, you're about to get hooked. Bottom of form. That sound, a small mechanical click that took less than a second, stayed inside my chest for years. Not as noise exactly. More like a physical thing, a small dense weight lodged between my ribs, appearing in quiet rooms, in the middle of ordinary days. I was pregnant. I was 16 years old, pregnant, standing in rain that was falling harder now, as though the sky had finally made up its mind. I didn't fully understand what the pregnancy meant for my future. I just knew I needed help, and the two people who were supposed to be the immovable ground beneath my feet had just confirmed they were not ground at all. I stood on those steps for a long time. Then I picked up my bag, pulled it higher on my shoulder and started walking. I had nowhere to go. No plan. Just fear and a stubborn need to survive. That was the night everything ended. And the night everything began. I walked until my legs stopped cooperating, until the rain had soaked through my jacket and into what felt like my actual bones. My phone battery was blinking its last warning. I called the only person I could think of. His name was Adrian. He was 17, tall and quietly serious, with a habit of thinking before he spoke that I had always found steadying. He was the boy I loved. He was also the reason I was standing in the rain. He answered on the second ring. My voice wasn't working the way I needed it to. When I told him what happened, his voice shook. He said he was coming. He came in 10 minutes. When his car finally pulled up and the headlights washed over me, I felt something release in my chest, some locked and rigid thing that had been braced since I heard the bolt turn, and I cried for the first time that night. Real crying, the kind that comes from the center of the heart and body. He didn't get out and ask what happened. He leaned across and opened the passenger door from the inside, and he said simply and without condition, "Get in." He drove to his older cousin Marianne's apartment on the far side of the neighborhood. She opened the door before we reached the top of the staircase. She was in her late 20s, with the kind of face that has learned to read situations quickly. She looked at me, then at my bag, then at my face, and took in all 3 pieces of information in about 4 seconds. "Come in," she said. "You look like you need rest." No interrogation. No lecture. No recitation of what I should have done differently. Just an open door and a practical statement of fact. She gave me a blanket, the small room at the back of the apartment, and a glass of water. She said we could talk tomorrow or not at all, whichever I needed. That night I lay on the narrow bed and took stock. A bag with 2 changes of clothes, a phone with a cracked screen, and approximately nothing else. My parents had locked the door. The boy I loved was sleeping on Marianne's couch because he didn't want to leave me alone. A woman who owed me nothing had opened her home without being asked. Everything hurt. But I was not alone. And that small, ordinary fact, I was not alone, felt in that moment like the first fragment of something I could eventually build on. Living with Marianne changed things in ways I didn't expect. The apartment was small. Thin walls, one bathroom, a kitchen two people couldn't share comfortably. Nothing like the house I had grown up in. It felt safer than anywhere I had ever been. Marianne worked long hours at a healthcare clinic, left early, came back tired, but she always checked on me. She left notes on the kitchen counter. There's soup in the pot, in her neat handwriting. She didn't make me feel like a burden. She just made room without ceremony or complaint. I went back to school. I walked those corridors aware of every glance, every conversation that paused when I passed. Some people whispered. Some avoided me. A few were genuinely, simply kind, in the way that makes you remember them for years. Kept my head down. I did the work. I came home and slept and went back. Adrian was still present, trying in the ways available to a 17-year-old who was also scared. He sat with me in the evenings and we talked about the baby, about what we would do, how we might manage school and work, and a life neither of us had been prepared for. He was kind, and the trying mattered, even when the answers weren't clear. But underneath all the practicalities, I was terrified in a way I couldn't share with anyone. I didn't know how to be a mother. I was barely managing to be myself. I lay awake some nights making quiet promises to the baby, that things would be better, that being unwanted by the people who were supposed to want you most was not a verdict on your value. I made those promises partly for the baby and partly for myself. I didn't know how I would keep them. I just knew I would not stop trying. At 4 months, I woke one morning and something was wrong. The body communicates in its own language, before words are available. I lay still for a moment, and then the pain came. Sudden, serious, undeniable, and I called for Marla. She was at my door in seconds, got me into a taxi without stopping to ask questions, and held my hand the entire way to the clinic, her grip telling the truer story of how worried she was. The doctor spoke gently. But I already knew. I had lost the baby. The room went very quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. People were still moving, machines still running, but inside me everything had gone still and flat and colorless. I felt a kind of emptiness I didn't have language for. Not just sadness, but something bigger and stranger, as though a space had been excavated from the center of me. Adrian cried openly, without trying to manage it. Marianne held my hand. She didn't say it would be okay. She didn't reach for platitudes. She just held on. For several days I could barely move. I thought about the life I had already begun to imagine. Small and tentative and not fully formed, but there. That future had been made and unmade in the same breath. And then, slowly, something shifted. Not happiness. Not relief. Something quieter and more structural. A recognition. You are still here. Not as comfort exactly. Fact. The most stripped back, unornamented fact available to me in that moment. I was still here. My heart was still beating. My hands were still mine. The morning was still coming through the window whether I was ready for it or not. After that I changed. Not in the dramatic way that transformation is sometimes described, like a sudden light or a clean break. More like a shift in orientation, the way a plant gradually turns toward a light source without any single moment you can point to and say, there, that was the turn. I stopped waiting. That was the core of it. I stopped checking some internal register of hope that my parents might call. I stopped expecting anything from people who had demonstrated, with remarkable clarity, what I could expect. I was on my own. Not abandoned. I had Marianne and Adrian, and those people were real and important. But in the fundamental sense, in the sense of ultimate responsibility for the shape of my life, it was mine. No one was coming with a plan. If I wanted a different life, I was going to have to build it from whatever I had. Marianne helped me find evening classes at a community education program. Design, layout, digital skills. She had noticed, without making a production of it, that I had covered my school notebook's back cover with little drawings and typographic experiments I hadn't even consciously thought of as anything in particular. I started working days at a small print shop nearby. The owner was Mr. Hale, somewhere in his late 60s, large slow hands, extraordinary patience. He played classical music on a portable speaker and explained things once, then let you learn by doing. He taught me how the page worked, not just printing, design. The way space and text and image could guide a person's attention without them realizing it. The way color created emotion before the brain processed meaning. I made mistakes constantly. Mr. Hale would cock his head to one side in a way that said, "Try again." I tried again every time. Because for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was building something rather than losing it. And the feeling of building, even badly, gave me a sense of control I had not felt in years. I worked harder than I had known I was capable of working. Not out of desperation anymore. Out of wanting. By the time I was 20, I had completed my evening courses and built a small but genuine portfolio. Mr. Hale told me one afternoon, while locking up the shop, that I had real talent. He said it the way he said everything, straightforwardly without inflation, and because of that I believed it. Talent. I turned the word over for days. It felt foreign, like something in a language I had studied but never spoken out loud. No one had ever said that to me without a qualification attached. I applied for a position at a small design studio in the city. The interview was brief and slightly intimidating, and I told myself afterwards that I hadn't got the job, as a preemptive measure. Then I got the job. I worked there for 3 years. I was not the most naturally gifted person in the room, and I was aware of it. But I was the most relentlessly attentive to how the senior designers made decisions, how they talked to clients, how they handled rejection and revision. I worked late when I didn't have to, asked questions when I could have stayed quiet, offered my own ideas carefully, testing and revising them. Adrian and I drifted apart somewhere in those years. There was no dramatic ending. Just two people who had survived something together and then gradually found their footing as separately shaped individuals. I grieved it quietly, but I understood it. Some people enter your life at precisely the moment you would not have survived without them. When the dark begins to lift, they continue in their direction and you continue in yours. And the love you had was no less real for being temporary. 24, I quit my job. Everyone around me had opinions. My colleagues thought it was premature. A friend said I wasn't ready. What I had was 3 years of experience, a portfolio I believed in, and a feeling in my chest I can only describe as a deep, directional pressure. Something pointing forward. I rented a small room above a cleaning supply shop that smelled of industrial detergent and good coffee from the place on the corner. I put my laptop on a folding table and started calling people. The first 3 months were the hardest of my adult life. I earned barely enough to cover the room and doubted myself on a schedule. Morning doubt, afternoon doubt, the particular 2 a.m. doubt that makes the worst possible assessment feel like the only accurate one. But I kept going. One client led to two. Two led to referrals. Small businesses who needed branding they could actually afford. I was meticulous, honest when something wasn't working, on time, consistent, and I listened in a way that made clients feel heard rather than processed. Trust accumulated slowly, then faster. By 26, I had enough regular clients to bring in someone to help with administrative work. By 28, I had a proper office and a team of 4. Small still, but real. I sat at my desk one evening when everyone had gone home and looked around the room. At the work on the walls, the equipment we'd invested in, the list of current clients pinned to the board, and felt something rise in my chest that was entirely different from anything I had known in that house with the oak trees and the cold silences. Built this. Not inherited. Not handed to me. Not contingent on someone else's approval. Built by my hands and my choices and my refusal to fold completely when folding would have been easier. That feeling, specific and earned and entirely mine, was worth every difficult night. By 30, the business had grown into something I sometimes had to remind myself was real. Proper team. A client list that reached across industries. A reputation accumulated not by performance but by years of doing good work honestly. I had created my own family too. Not by blood, which had proven itself unreliable as a foundation, but by choice. Colleagues who had become genuine friends. People who showed up, who could be counted on. Sometimes I would sit at my desk in the early morning with my coffee and the quiet, and let myself feel the full weight of the distance between where I was and where I had started. Not as triumph exactly. More as a kind of accounting, everything it had cost and everything it had given back, measured honestly against each other. I told myself I had moved on. And most days I believed it. But there were nights, unexpected and unannounced, when I would feel that small dense weight between my ribs. The sound of a lock. The rain, light at first, like the sky didn't want to get involved. Some things don't disappear. They just learn to live more quietly in you. I had not heard from my parents in years. Not a phone call, not a letter, not a message forwarded through anyone. Total silence, absolute and consistent, as though a curtain had dropped on the night of the rain and no one had touched it since. I stopped expecting contact the way you eventually stop expecting a bus that never comes. Not bitterly, just practically. Had my people. Had my work. I had a life that was recognizably mine in every detail. Then one evening everything shifted again. It was an ordinary Friday evening. I had closed the office a little after 7, which was early for me. I drove home, made a simple dinner and sat down to eat. I was tired in the good way, the kind that comes from a full day of useful, demanding work. I was inside my apartment, jacket barely off, keys still in my hand when I heard the knock. When I opened the door, time seemed to stop. My parents stood there. Older. Thinner. My mother's hair had more gray in it. My father's shoulders were not as straight as I remembered. Both of them had been stood next to the actual scale of the world and measured against it honestly. Something that had once seemed very large and authoritative had quietly reduced. But their eyes were the same. And suddenly I was 16 again, standing on that porch. Only this time I was the one inside. No one spoke at first. We just stood there, looking at each other like strangers who shared too much history. My mother finally broke the silence. "Celeste," she said softly. My actual name in her actual voice, for the first time in over a decade. Hearing it felt strange. Like hearing a song you used to love but had not played in a long time. And everything came rushing back, not as narrative or sequence, but as sensation. The rain. The cold. The sound of the bolt. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice was calm. "To come." I did not step back immediately to let them in. I stood at the threshold and looked at them and tried to understand what this was. My father was looking at the floor, a detail that surprised me. The man I had known would never have looked at the floor. Whatever had happened in the years between, it had taken something from the set of his shoulders and the angle of his gaze. My mother was looking at me directly, for the first time since the night she had chosen not to. There was something in her expression that could have been love and could have been guilt and could have been calculation and was probably, being honest, a complicated mixture of all three. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. My voice was level and clear and it did not shake, not because I was unaffected, but because the woman standing in that doorway was not the girl who had left. She had been through too much to shake at the sight of two people she had already survived. We sat in my living room. They looked around with the careful attention of people entering unfamiliar territory, taking in the framed prints, the shelves of design books, the small evidence of a particular and self-constructed identity. They were recalibrating, revising whatever version of me they had imagined, or perhaps avoided imagining for the past decade. My father cleared his throat. That sound was so unchanged, so exactly as I remembered it, that I almost felt something shift in my chest. Almost. "We need your help," he said. No greeting. No "how have you been" or "you look well." Just the need stated plainly before anything else. And in those 4 words, I understood exactly what this visit was. They told me about the money. It came out in carefully managed pieces, each disclosure followed by a pause, as though they were monitoring my reaction before deciding how much more to reveal. There were debts, significant ones. Decisions my father had made that had not gone the way he planned. Obligations that had compounded quietly for years while the appearance of stability was maintained with considerable effort. They were facing the loss of the house. They had seen some weeks before a profile piece covering businesses in our region, about my company's growth, the team I had built, and the foundation work we were doing to support young people from difficult backgrounds entering the creative industries. The piece had included my photograph. Underneath the carefully managed presentation, the truth was clear. They were desperate. They had come to me because they had nowhere else to turn. When they finished, I asked the only question that mattered. Why now? They looked at each other. That look, private and practiced and slightly guilty, told me something too. My mother answered in a soft, controlled voice. We saw your success, she said. Not we missed you every day. Not we were wrong and we knew it. Just we saw your success. Not love. Not regret. Opportunity. I looked at them both and felt something settle in me. Very quiet and very final, like a last piece slotting into place. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that because people expect anger in this story, and I understand why. But what I felt was not anger. Anger requires ongoing combustion fed by hope. I had spent years cooling down from the temperature of that night, and what remained was not fire. It was clarity. You didn't come because you missed me, I said. The way you state a fact about weather or geography. Not as accusation. A simple observation. Neither of them denied it. That silence, that absence of denial, was both the most honest thing that had passed between us in years and the thing that confirmed everything I already understood about why they were sitting in my living room at all. My father tried to explain. He spoke about fear, about the world he had grown up in, about how he had been raised and what had felt possible and what had not. I listened. I let him finish. But truth about the past does not revise the past. His fear, however real, had made its consequences known on a night 13 years ago, and those consequences had lived in my body and my life and my story every day since. I did not pretend that explanation was the same as repair. I survived without you, I said. The sentence sat in the room simply and completely. I built everything I have without you. Without your approval or your support or your presence. Everything you see, everything you read about in that article. Every single part of it was built from the night you locked the door. My voice did not shake. Because it was entirely true. And truth, spoken from a place of genuine knowledge rather than performance, has a quality of stillness to it. It doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to defend itself. Just stands. My father looked at me and something moved in his face. The look of a man confronting the full dimension of a choice he had made 20 years ago and finally allowing it to be as large as it actually was. My mother began to cry. The tears came quietly, with a particular restraint of someone who has spent a lifetime managing their emotions in front of other people. They were real tears. Genuine grief, genuine regret, working its way out through the only available exit. She had carried something too these years. Whatever choices she had made and whatever silences she had maintained, she had not been untouched by them. Felt something. Not the pull toward comfort that I might have felt as a child. But a small, specific recognition of pain that was not mine and was not performed. I stayed where I was. Not from cruelty. From the hard-won understanding that feeling compassion for someone's pain is not the same as taking responsibility for fixing it. I won't give you money, I said. Clearly. Without hedging. The words were firm not because I was performing strength, but because they were simply true. My foundation was built on a specific purpose and a specific story, and it was not available to be repurposed. The success I had built was mine, in the most complete and hard-earned sense of that word. My father nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they have received exactly what they expected but had nonetheless needed to ask for. And in that nod I saw something true. He hadn't really come expecting yes. Maybe he hadn't come for the money at all, or not only for the money. Maybe, underneath all the practical desperation, there had been something else looking for a door. But, I said. They both looked up. I am willing to talk. Not today. Not like this, with an agenda between us. But at some point, if you're willing to come without needing something from me. Not money, not a story for anyone else, nothing except to sit in the same room with honesty between us. I'm open to that. Pause. I'm not offering you anything I've built. I'm offering you one honest conversation between people who share a history they've never actually spoken about directly. That is all I have to give right now. And I will not promise what comes after it." The room was very still. They left quietly. No argument. No final push. They gathered themselves. My mother wiping her face with a composure that was almost entirely assembled, my father standing with his coat in his hands, looking like a man who had not quite ended up where he expected. At the door my father stopped. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you for letting us in. Not just through the door." I understood that. He nodded. I let it be what it was. Then they walked down the staircase and I heard the building door open and close below, and I stood in my hallway in the quiet of my apartment and held the evening. After they left, I sat alone for a long time. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't call anyone. I didn't do anything to dilute or distract from what was present in the room. I thought about the past, the full expanse of it. The night and the rain and Marla's blanket and Mr. Hale's music in the print shop, and the slow accumulation of years that had produced the person now sitting in this chair. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had built in its place. I had become someone I recognized fully and trusted completely. That had not been given to me. Made it. I realized something that evening that I had been approaching for years without naming it. I did not need them. Not in the way I had needed them at 16. Desperately, completely the way you need air. The part of me that once required something from Ronald and Patricia had completed itself, not by receiving what it needed from them, but by building an entirely different foundation. Year by year. Choice by choice. Person by person. Marianne had given me the first solid ground. Mr. Hale had given me language and skill. Every client who trusted me, every team member who stayed, every young person our foundation supported had added to something now entirely self-sustaining. I did not need my parents to complete anything. I was already complete. And the freedom of that, the absolute clean freedom of needing nothing from the people who had once had everything, was the most profound thing I had ever felt. 3 weeks after they came to my apartment, my father called. Just to talk. The conversation was awkward. Silences that didn't know what to do with themselves. Pauses neither of us had the history to fill naturally. At the end he said, "I'm proud of you, Celeste. I know that means very little from where I'm standing, but I have felt it for years. Even from a distance." I said, "Thank you." Simply that. I let it be enough. My mother wrote me a letter 2 weeks after that. 4 handwritten pages. She did not ask for anything in it. She told me things she had never told me. About the days after I left, about what she had carried in private, about the moment she recognized my face in the article. She had sat down on the kitchen floor, she wrote, and stayed there for a long time. It was the most honest communication she had ever offered me. Imperfect. Incomplete in the ways all late reckonings are incomplete. But real. I read it several times. I wrote back, shorter than her letter because I had less to offer yet, but genuine. True things carefully chosen. I want to be clear about what this became. It did not become a fairy tale. My parents did not become the parents I had needed at 16. No conversation, however honest, can repair an architecture built on different foundations. No letter, however genuine, gives back a childhood. What it became was something quieter. Occasional contact, careful and honest when honesty was available. My father and I met for coffee once. Over an hour talking about work and time and regret, with a particular carefulness of two people learning to occupy the same space after very long absence. The word daughter carries more than either of us is yet ready to lift together. Perhaps one day. Perhaps not. What I know is this. I am not waiting for them to complete anything in me. That work is finished. I completed it myself. In a print shop with classical music playing, in a rented room above a dry cleaning shop, in the office I built floor by floor, in the face of every young person who came to our foundation scared and told they were a problem rather than a person. The girl who stood on the porch steps in the rain, shaking so hard she could hear her own teeth. She is still in me. I carry her carefully. But she is not afraid anymore. She never needed the door to open from the inside. She just needed the courage to start walking away from it. And one day, This day and every day after it, she would sit in something she had built with her own hands and understand completely that the locked door was not the end of her story. It was the first necessary sentence of it. If this story landed somewhere true in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose ordinary Friday you might change.